In this session, we are first going to explore who is a refugee, what criteria define that term, the eligibility requirements to obtain refugee status, and the scale of this humanitarian crisis. Next, we'll talk about the refugee resettlement process from one's native country, possibly to a camp or urban area, through various screenings, and then to the US. Finally, we'll talk about what services refugees receive upon arrival and how the refugee response fits into that picture of supports. I like to start off by making sure we all have a clear understanding of what it means to be a refugee. So, refugee is a legal term of protection granted by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or the UNHCR. It is distinct from other types of migrants, such as asylees or economic migrants. It refers to someone who has fled one's home country and crossed an international border due to a well-founded fear of persecution. That may be for reasons of race, religion, nationality, or membership of a particular group or political opinion. Individuals who meet these criteria are designated as refugees and therefore eligible for certain rights and protections. Around the world today, there are an unprecedented 70,800,000 forcibly displaced persons. To put that in perspective, that means one person every 2 seconds is forced from their home as a result of conflict or persecution. This number includes 25.9 million refugees, half of whom are under the age of 18. This is, sadly to say, the largest number of refugees ever recorded in human history, and this number has doubled just within the last 10 years. When individuals and families face displacement, they seek refuge in refugee camps or communities in neighboring countries. Many camps around the world were originally intended as temporary shelters to provide immediate emergency relief, but now host hundreds of thousands of people and have been strained by increasing numbers. Often there is a lack of educational opportunities and employment, and movement is restricted and communities are forced to rely on humanitarian support. The other 60% of refugees today live in urban areas, where they have more opportunities to live and study within the local community, depending on the host country's regulations. For those who do end up in camps, the average time spent in camp life is 15 to 20 years prior to resettlement. If you remember, over half of refugees today are children. Many of these children are born and raised in these camps and miss out on valuable opportunities during some of the most critical years of their lives. The resettlement process, as we discussed, begins with an individual fleeing their home to a neighboring country, where they access shelter either within a refugee camp along the border or designated housing within urban areas. Refugees face 3 possible routes. Ideally, repatriation to their home country, if and when it is considered safe. This is often not the case for long-term regional conflicts. The second possibility is local integration into the country of flight, depending on the neighboring country's policies. If neither of these are an option, then refugees face resettlement to a third country, such as the United States, often located beyond the local region. Host countries such as the US agree to accept a particular number of refugees each year and offer to admit them with permanent resident status and papers. Refugees cannot be deported and have the same rights and access to resources as other permanent residents. They are also eligible to obtain citizenship after 5 years in the country. It's important to note that by definition, there is no such thing as an illegal refugee. The United States arguably has one of the most thorough vetting systems for processing and accepting refugees. This is a process that involves the Department of Homeland Security and State, the FBI, and national intelligence agencies. In the last few years, the processing time from start to finish to gain entry to the US averaged between 18 months and 3 years. Worldwide, only 1% of refugees actually make it through the resettlement process. Screening involves a number of security checks, health screenings, interviews, and a cultural orientation that ranges from 1 to 5 days, covering a whirlwind of topics such as housing, employment, education, financial management, and most immediately important, procedures for boarding an airplane. This orientation continues upon arrival to the US. Once in the country, refugee families are assigned to a nonprofit resettlement agency funded by the State Department. These agencies provide a range of intensive support services during a refugee's first 3 months, known as reception and placement, which include picking up new arrivals from the airport, finding accommodations for them, enrolling their children in school, connecting them with employment, and social or language services, as well as a one-time disbursement of financial support. After the first 3 months in the country, these support services begin to drop off. Individuals may be eligible for various benefits for up to 5 years, though many much less, and they are expected to become self-sufficient as quickly as possible. It's also important to note that families are expected to pay back the cost of their overseas travel while adapting to a new culture, new language, and new environment. In addition to the challenges they faced in their native country, this period of resettlement can often trigger new trauma as families struggle emotionally and financially to stay afloat. While we work closely with these agencies and often engage in meaningful partnerships, the Refugee Response itself is not a resettlement agency. Rather, we are here to support refugee families on their longer-term journey beyond their initial months and years after arrival through a variety of programs and touchpoints. The Refugee Response exists within a larger network that consists of resettlement agencies, local school districts, healthcare providers, and other community and faith-based organizations, providing specific and targeted supports to newcomer families. Many of these groups are members of the Refugee Services Collaborative of Greater Cleveland and engage regularly to identify needs, opportunities, and coordinate support for families resettled to the region. At the Refugee Response, we understand that resettlement is more than just physically relocating from one place to another, finding a job, or learning a new language. It's about growing roots, developing a strong network of support, making sense of one's identity, telling stories of strength and hope, and finding a sense of home. We invite you to continue learning how you can be a meaningful part of that journey.